Welcome to Unit 7, Section 4. This is the Cold War, but this time instead of talking about it beginning, we're going to be talking about how it expands, how it grows. This is Section 4. Sorry that's cut off. I don't know why that was cut off. Excuse me. But we're going to be talking here about the United States and how this conflict is going to escalate. Our focus question is going to stay the same. Should the United States stay neutral in global conflicts, or should it intervene? Okay, and hopefully you're starting to frame more of an opinion about this in the past and in today. Okay, and hopefully you're also seeing why it's a little bit more complicated than maybe you had thought originally. Now, let's talk a little bit in our first objective. What events led to the growing contention between the U.S. and the USSR? What's going to make us even more contentious towards one another? We talked about the very beginning, but what else is going to lead to this contention? Objective 2, how did countries respond to the USSR intervention? So we're going to look at how countries are going to deal and how they're going to be very frustrated that they are being occupied, just like any group. Any group that the United States has owned or occupied has been angry, and the same thing's going to happen to the USSR. Countries are going to be very upset that they don't have autonomy, they don't have freedom, and they're going to want those things. And then objective 3, how did competition between the US and the USSR create new technology? And it's going to, you can see that like there's a lot of competition between the two, and there's some amazing things that are going to come out at this time period. Okay, so let's go ahead and start talking about how the Cold War is going to expand. The first thing that you do when you want to be the top dog country, right, is to start building up a military. And so this is really going to be one of the biggest, what we call arms races in world history, where countries are going to build up as fast as they can their military power, so that way, in case there's a war, they're going to be the world domination. Right? The United States has followed this policy from Theodore Roosevelt. You might remember it, the stick policy, the walking stick policy, right? Which is speak. The quote goes from an African proverb: "Speak softly, but carry a big stick," which is the idea that if you're carrying the biggest stick, you don't have to talk a lot. You don't have to sit there and yap around a lot because you've got the biggest stick, and you can beat somebody with that stick at any point, and they know they're going to not be happy, that they're going to die if they do, right? This is kind of the United States policy of, you know what? We don't have to really say a lot. We don't have to really do a lot because we're the biggest and best military in the world, and we don't really have to do much. Now, interestingly enough, the United States, oh, this probably happened, I can't ever remember exactly when, but I think about 8, maybe 10 years ago, the United States finally, since World War II, was overtaken as another group overtook the United States in spending in military. And I always ask students, I'm like, do you know who that was? And in this graph right here will probably demonstrate to you what it is. You can see that the United States, since World War II, has outspent every other country when it comes to military since then. But for the first time ever, China, Russia, the UK, France, Japan, India, Saudi Arabia, Germany, and a bunch of other countries put together finally outspent the United States. The United States generally spends about $754 billion a year in military. And I think those countries now together are spending just under $800 billion. So that is a big deal that the United States, and hopefully it helps you understand how much money we invest into military to this day. Okay, nobody really, no one nation even comes close to that. Now that doesn't mean that that means we would beat everyone no matter what, but it does mean that we spend a lot of money and we have a lot of military supplies, we have a lot of weapons, we have a lot of people, we have a lot of technology in military. So one of the big things I want to talk about here is this shift of power, and there's going to be an event that's going to happen on September 2nd, 1949. There's going to be a B-29 aircraft that's going to be flying over, and it's going to be detecting atmospheric radiation, meaning, yeah, you guys, like, this is what's crazy, is you should be understanding that in the military today, they do so much more than what you think possibly. They don't just go fight other people, but they're always constantly observing, analyzing, looking to look for threats. And so on this day, this B-29 aircraft is going to be flying, and it's just going to be taking atmospheric radiation levels. Now, why would they do that? You'll remember that the United States back in 1945 was the first country to ever use an atomic bomb on top of a civilian group of people, right? Killed 140,000 people. The the United States is going to be detecting radiation because they're worried that another country has now gained the ability to make a nuclear weapon. And sure enough, guess what? They're going to be flying over Siberia undetected, and they're going to be studying the air and what's in the air, and they're going to find that radiation levels over Siberia, which it evidently, you might not remember this, or is that Siberia is in Russia. It's just is the eastern part of Russia. Is they're going to find that there are going to be huge spikes of radiation. I mean, off the chart levels of radiation. Now, what does that mean? That means that the Soviet Union has created its first nuclear bomb. The thing the United States dreaded the most. Because if you think about it, what's our big stick? Our big stick for the longest time was, or for a couple years at least, was the nuclear bomb. No matter what Russia did, no matter what it thought about, the United States had one thing that it could control the USSR with, and that was the nuclear bomb. At any point in time, we could use a bomb that could kill millions of people in the blink of an eye. Well, unfortunately for us, Russia or the USSR is going to develop that and have it 4 years later. So let's talk a little bit about this for a second. This is going to shock the world, to shock the US and all of our capitalistic allies, NATO, and it's going to make us really scared because we thought they were years farther away from making this bomb. Now I want you guys to put this in perspective here, okay? The bomb we dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima was about a 2-mile radius. Okay, so from the center of the bomb to its complete diameter was about 2 miles. Okay, put that in comparison to the HBomb, the hydrogen bomb that the Soviet Union developed after that. So this is 2 miles, this is 20 miles. Look at its comparison of those two. Now the United States this bomb is nothing even compared to the bombs that we have now. We have bombs that are even bigger than this, but both of us are now competing for this kind of an arsenal, right? We're also going to be scared not only because of this bomb, but we're going to see that communism is actually going to continue to be spreading. We're no longer just being able to contain it. It keeps growing and going farther and farther. The most recent example at this time period is going to be China. Okay, so China is going to become communistic at this time. This is going to scare us. How do we stop communism? How do we now that they have a weapon and a bomb just as big as ours, how do we stop these people? So Truman's going to order the Atomic Energy Commission to build a hydrogen bomb too. This hydrogen bomb will be 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb, and he hoped that it would make us the ones back on top again. And basically, this is an arms race. The United States and the Soviet Unions are going to continue to build bombs back and forth, back and forth. Some really notable people who worked on the H-bomb and on the atomic bombs are going to be Oppenheimer, and a guy you might remember as Einstein. They are going to oppose the production of the H-bomb. Einstein and Oppenheimer, because they worked on the atomic bomb and they saw what it did to the people, they don't want to be a part of anything else that it could kill even more people. And so they're going to be very against the building of this bomb. In fact, Einstein will write President Truman and tell him that he cannot do this because once he does it, it makes it so the USSR can do it and it just never ends. It creates this perpetual arms race, meaning that we're going to never stop fighting to become the best, right? So in 1952, the first H-bomb will be dropped in U.S., okay? And then months later, the USSR is going to drop one as well. This is important. Like, you might think, like, well, where did we drop these bombs at? Like, we didn't do it on people anymore. Like, after Japan, we never dropped another bomb on people like that. But we were doing it in the deserts of Nevada and actually parts of Utah, which is really important because the radiation levels from these bombs were so high that it's actually caused people, even to this day, to have health problems in these states. They didn't drop it right next to any city. It was in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. But I don't think they realized how radioactive, how bad the effects would be from this bomb later on. There are going to be major health problems years to come from this, and lawsuits costing millions upon millions of dollars from U.S. citizens suing their own government. This idea is going to be what we call mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction is when basically it's if you push your button, I'm going to push my button. And if both of our buttons get pushed, bombs are going to come and kill everyone. So we better not push our buttons because if we do, we're literally going to kill every single person. This is mutually assured destruction. I won't kill you because if I do, you'll kill me and we'll all die. Right? Eisenhower's going to introduce this new policy. He's going to go away from President Truman's policy. Remember, President Truman is doing a policy of containment. He's going to do a policy of the Marshall Plan. It's costing the United States a lot of money, and it's costing the United States a lot of money, not only because we're giving countries money, but because we are spending so much money trying to stop Russia. You'll remember the Korean War, the Vietnam War. Those wars are examples of Truman trying to stop the communists from spreading into Korea, and then later the United States trying to stop communism from spreading in Vietnam with John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Richard Nixon. Okay? So Eisenhower's going to be against this. Now, one thing that really, he's going to become president. Truman was a Democrat. He was the vice president of FDR. He'll serve one term. So he'll finish out the term of FDR, then he'll serve one term of his own, and then he'll stop being president. And President Eisenhower, who's a Republican, is going to become now. Now, Eisenhower is incredibly famous. He was one of the main generals during World War II. He helped liberate the Jews in the Holocaust. So he's very famous, and he's a war hero. But a lot of people like him too because he seems to speak two languages. And when I say two languages, I'm not saying like an actual like Spanish or English. I'm saying he speaks military and political. He speaks military because he understands how militaries work. He understands strategy. He understands what Stalin and other groups are trying to do. But he also speaks political because he's now the president. He understands how politics work. So this kind of gives him a pretty good advantage. Now, he is going to believe in containing communism, but he's going to do a very different route. His Secretary of State Dulles, is going to help organize the UN. The UN stands for the United Nations, right? And he's going to say that the UN should be a group of people who get together, a group of nations that get together to try to stop war. And this group really, to this day, is one of the most, one of the strongest, powerful groups in the world. They meet all the time to talk about how to resolve conflicts. They try to hold other countries accountable for bad behavior. And the United States spends a lot of money in the UN. We spend billions of dollars in the UN. And this has caused us to believe that we should be supported a little bit more. And it really does, hopefully understand, it helps us get a lot more of what we want done in the world than what other countries do. Because we do fund so much of it. So they're going to form the UN. Now, he is going to disagree with Truman. He's going to feel like Truman's policy, the way he's going about containment, it brings basically never-ending wars. Because if Stalin tries to go take over another country, we instantly jump in and we get involved. And he's like, we can't keep doing that. We can't just jump into any war all the time. We just cannot keep doing that. So instead, Eisenhower's going to favor this idea of what's called massive retaliation. It's this idea that basically the United States is going to spend as much money as it humanly possibly can, not on wars, but on weapons. We're going to get the most weapons, the biggest weapons, the best weapons, the most deadly weapons. And we're going to basically say, listen, Stalin, you can do whatever you want. But if you take a toe out of line, if you screw up and just mess up, we are going to absolutely destroy you. So if you attack us, if you do anything that is going to hurt us, we will destroy your country. Okay? Some other people said this caused massive war, but Eisenhower's going to say, no, this is going to take us right up to the brink of war, but it's not going to actually make us go over war. Okay? So Eisenhower Strategy is going to save us a lot of money. In 1953, under President Truman, we spent $50.5 billion. And 2 years later, we were only spending $35.8 billion. So Eisenhower likes this. The country likes this because we're not spending as much weapons. But at the same time, the weapons we are buying, the weapons we are doing, are going to keep the Soviet Union in line and in check. Again, this is this idea that if the Soviet Union does anything, we will respond with absolute crushing defeat. We won't start a war, but if you start it, we will definitely finish it. Okay? Here's a famous quote that comes from this, and that idea called brinkmanship is going to come from. It says, "A potential aggressor must know that he cannot always prescribe battle conditions to suit him." So you don't get to decide how the battle happens. You don't get to decide who's where and when and any of that stuff. The way to deter aggression, to stop aggression, is for the free community to be willing and able to respond vigorously, means intense, at places with means of its choosing, meaning we can respond anytime, anywhere, anyhow, with as much force as needed. This is this idea of brinkmanship. We're going to go right up to the brink of war, right up to the line. We're not going to cross the line. We're going to get right up to it. And by staying on that line, we won't actually get into war. Okay? This, to a lot of people, seems insane. But some people, it seems to really make sense. And it did work for quite a bit of time. However, it also is a lot of stress. You think about it, like basically the United States at all moments in times fears that it could be the next day at war. And it does this for years. So a lot of stress on people. Well, in 1953, Stalin's going to die, and this is going to ease tensions quite a bit because Stalin was so hated by a lot of people that really when he died, it finally kind of created a lot of, like, almost like a breath, like, oh, okay, now things are going to get back to a little bit normal. However, Nikita Khrushchev is going to emerge, and he's going to be very different than Stalin. He will be much more laid back. He won't be nearly as aggressive. However, he is going to continue to try to spread communism. So in July of 1955, Khrushchev will meet with Eisenhower in Geneva for a conference. The conference really didn't do anything. Nothing really formally happened. It was supposed to try to help ease tensions, cause it so we didn't fight anymore, that the Cold War would end. But it really doesn't have much of an effect. In fact, it really almost is just a symbol that maybe peace one day would happen. So Khrushchev is going to go, he's going to continue to increase communism, but at the same time, a lot of the satellite states that he owns, such as Poland and Hungary and Ukraine, the people are going to be furious. They're tired of being a satellite state. They want to be their own country. They don't want to be ruled anymore. So many of these satellite states, they demand freedom. For instance, in 1956, the workers all got together in Poland and they said they wanted to gain autonomy, and they'll gain it. They'll actually be able to fight them off. Hungarian students are going to want the same thing from the Soviet military. They're going to say they need them gone. That it's not okay for them to be around. Khrushchev is going to respond to the Hungarians, and he tries with the Polish people with absolute power. He's going to try to say to them that they're an example. You better not try to take us toe out of line, because if you do, I'll destroy you. The U.S. now under Truman's plan would have gotten involved. It would have jumped involved. It would have helped those countries. But under Eisenhower's plan, he says it's not our place to jump in. We hope those countries can fight. We hope those countries are successful. We pray for them. We care for them, but we're not going to get involved. The United States is going to just basically watch in horror. Now, a lot of other countries are going to be upset because they're saying, you guys have an atomic bomb, but you guys are refusing to use it. You're refusing to help us when we're trying to stop the Soviets. It's probably more complicated than that. The United States doesn't want to use a bomb to do that because they know darn well that the Soviets have the same capabilities. So in 1956, we can see different contention between the U.S. and the USSR, not through just war. War's not really going to happen between these. That's why we call it a Cold War, right? But in 1956, there's going to be the Olympic Games in Melbourne, Australia. And think about it. If you are in the Soviets, if you're from the Soviet Union and you're an Olympic athlete, and if you're from the U.S. and you're an Olympic athlete, think about the absolute perfect opportunity to embarrass those other countries by beating them in some kind of a sport. And so in 1956, they'll have the Olympic Games, and there'll be a polo match, a water polo match. And it'll be between the U.S. and the USSR, and it's going to become very violent. At one point in time, a Soviet is going to punch an American in the face and going to break kind of his first eye socket, like in his jaw. And it's going to cause a lot of frustration and anger. The U.S. is going to feel like This is not fair. And it's actually not the U.S. I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm saying. It's not the U.S. versus the Soviets. I think it's Hungary against the Soviets. And they'll fight. This is an example of the Cold War, because here you have a country who doesn't want to be a part of the Soviet Union, and here you have the Soviet Union. And while they're not going to fight militarily against each other, they are going to use this kind of, showroom, this sport, in order to get out their frustration. So the U.S. is going to do things to try to help these countries, but they're not going to do what they had in Truman and come save the day. Another example of the U.S. getting involved, though, would be like, for instance, in Egypt. In Egypt, they'll have their president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, who is going to want to start taking more control over his country. France and England own Egypt at this point. They had taken advantage of Egypt for a long time, and Nasser is really upset about this. He's tired of this. So they decide that they're going to build a dam on the Nile River at Aswan. And this dam is going to be great. It's going to help build a bunch of different ditches or canals to help with agriculture. It's going to help provide power. It's going to help people be able to move and transport things. It's going to be a really big deal. Problem is Egypt doesn't have a lot of money. So the U.S. and England say that they'll build the dam for Egypt. And that's what they're going to do. It was a really great thing, right? But Egypt decides to recognize China as a communist country. It officially recognizes China as the People's Republic of China, which is communistic. And the U.S. says, hey, you know what? If you guys are going to support a communist country, then we're not going to build your dam for you. That's our money. We don't have to spend our money if we don't want to on something like this. And this is going to really, instead of helping the United States and Egypt heal, it's going to cause a lot of frustration and anger, because Nasser is going to nationalize the Suez Canal, meaning he's not going to allow England and France to control it anymore. He's going to make the government in control over it. The British and the French, and actually the Israeli governments, are going to get together, and they're going to decide that they want to get this dam back. So they're going to make a plot to try to get this dam back. This is where I have to say Eisenhower did like a pretty good thing, where when he found out about this, because he didn't know about it, he was furious, and he refused to help, and he refused to supply any oil to these countries that were trying to do this. He was upset at Egypt for going to recognizing China, but he was not going to do a sneaky way about trying to steal something from the Egyptians. And so I really actually have to give credit to President Eisenhower for that. Eisenhower is going to have his own doctrine, just like Truman had his doctrine. Eisenhower's is going to be the U.S. is going to use its force to help any Middle Eastern country that's threatened by communism. Okay? In 1958, the U.S. is going to lend troops to Lebanon to help pro-U.S. governments put down revolts there. This is going to create the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, which was created in 1947 to gather intelligence. The CIA in 1953 is going to try to do a coup and then install a new government in Iran, to try to make sure it doesn't go to communism, that it stays pro-U.S. And unfortunately, it does not work at all well. We are actually caught, and it makes big tabloids. It makes the U.S. look terrible, like we are sneaky, that we're underhanded, and Iranians are going to be even to this day, very upset about this event. In 1954, we did the same thing in Guatemala as well. All these actions are going to create long-term resentment. To this day, Iran, has a really hard time with the United States. We can even see that to some degree with Guatemala, not nearly as bad, but we'll see some of that resentment there as well. So these are examples, again, of the United States trying to use kind of secretive ways to under and hurt the USSR. But it's also going to be not just competition in military or in governments. It's going to be a competition in technology. So the Cold War is going to blast off into space in October 4th, 1957. The Soviets are going to launch a 184-pound steel ball named Sputnik 1, and they're going to launch this satellite into space. And inside the satellite, they're going to actually even put a dog named Leica. There's a picture of Leica. And Leica did die in space. That's sad, right? Leica's up there somewhere right now, just bones, and passed away. Anyway, Leica and this steel ball will fly up into space, and the Soviets get to claim to be the first ones to ever put something into space. It's a pretty big deal. The United States feels humiliated, they're frustrated, they're angry because the USSR um, can now forever and always claim that they're the first ones ever to put something into space. Now think about this. What does the United States do? It gets together, it creates the National Defense Education Act, which guarantees $1 billion to schools to help train students into becoming scientists. We want to be the top dogs. We want scientists, so we're going to advocate that people get put into that. And we're also going to create NASA, which is going to be a whole group that's dedicated to aeronautics and space. And we have a goal, and that is to get a man on a moon. And so the Soviets can say that they're the first ones ever to put something into space. The United States can say that it's the first one ever to put a person into space and bring them back safely. As you know, Leica was not so fortunate. So this is the end of our section of notes here. Let's just make sure that our objectives have all been answered in satisfactory. What events led to the growing contention between the US and the USSR? A lot of it could be down to the arms race, both in military weapons as well as bombs. Massive retaliation would be one. So those are all examples of that. Objective 2, how did countries respond to USSR intervention? So you'll remember that they responded with military power, with incredible force against Poland and Hungary. They also spent money, right? Because eventually they're going to be the ones to build the dam for the Egyptians instead of the United States, because they're trying to build good relationships. Okay. And then objective 3, our last one, how did competition between the US and the USSR create new technology? It's primarily going to be in space. Okay, we're trying to be the first ones to do this. We're trying to be the first ones to do that. Because we're all trying to do that, we're going to spend a lot of money in technology and education and all sorts of things to ensure that we're the best. So hopefully that answers all the questions that you'll have. If you do have any, just email me. And thanks for listening.